there.
Okay, we're gonna get started. Thanks everyone for coming. I know that there's a plan. I first introduce the space and welcome you here to Recirculation, which is a project of Word Up Community Bookshop. I don't know if you've been to Word Up Community Bookshop. It's the space at Amsterdam on 165th Street, but it started almost 14 years ago as a 1 month long project. So the fact that we've been able to continue for that long because of huge community pressure to just keep spaces like this going has been awesome. It's mostly a volunteer-powered space. We're collectively run, and we are also a nonprofit. After we moved to the space we're at now, nearly 12 years ago, Amsterdam at 165, we have continued to try and do as many kind of community events as possible, meetings, workshops, classes. So if you would like to do anything, then please get in touch. That is our aim, to just be as responsive as possible to what you all need space for. And first and foremost is always the most important thing is the books, which is why I'm really excited about everyone who's here today, because in trying to promote this event, I was trying to find, and I couldn't quite get there with the week I had, but the photos of JP reading at the second Word Up birthday party when we didn't even have a space, and we were just using, we were doing a reading at a cafe. And I think all of you there's just so many photos I have of the three of you from all these different eras of Word Up, when we had space, didn't have space, we were doing things in all kinds of places, and I love it, just even things that are unrelated to actual readings, of which you've all had many, and of which you've all, helped support so many other people at. It's I have these pictures of you from the past of helping move boxes and corralling kids in. I think that was the thinking of JP and JP's very, very first interaction with the original Word Up pop-up space. It was within that first month, maybe within even the first 2 weeks, and he walked in and then brought a bunch of kids in the next day to introduce them to the space. So I'm always curious too as to where are those kids now. I hope they're still around. I hope they found their way back. But thank you for having done that nearly 14 years ago. And since then, this is Recirculation, so it's been around for about 4 years now. It came out of one of our collective members who passed away from COVID in June 2020, and he'd left us in charge of all of his books and records. So we brought them here to sort and to try and move them back out to the community, but then it became a space unto itself. So we've been recirculating both the books, but also the space. And all of the used books here are pay what you can, minimum $1. So fill up. If you have a classroom library you need to fill up, if you're doing research for something and you're not really sure about something, just grab it. We'll figure it out. But also, one thing I need to make sure to say before we go is that Word Up in general, organization, we're encompassing Word Up, recirculation, and everything else we do outside, is we're in the middle of a member campaign right now, where for as little as $5 a month, you would sign up and be a sustaining member. If you get to higher tiers, $10, $25, then you can get 10% off books at the store or online, even here today. 20% off books, at higher tiers, and also free entry to ticketed events. So I wanted to mention that. I know some of you have already purchased books for today, but in case you want to think about it and get any more books or get books anew, then if you sign up before, then I can apply those discounts. But one big reason, we were going to do this campaign anyway, but in the past month, just looking at what's been happening with, just arts organizations, any nonprofit organizations, anyone supporting, not DEI as a program, but just living it, as part of, as part of your everyday. All those things point us to the fact that we need to really be looking at community to just support what we do. So even if you can, and no pressure, if $5 a month is a lot, then just, if you could even help promote it to others, that'd be great too. And most of all, happy that you're all here. And hopefully you'll get JP's book. I'll turn it over to...
Let me just get out.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I like talking. Real quick, consider, if everyone here were to sign up, that's $5 a month. That's about $75, $80 a month, right? Which is not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's huge for an organization like Word Up. What's happening now is that there's no such space as the third space. You have work or school, then you have home. And there's usually a third space. Sometimes it will be libraries, sometimes it might be public parks, but we know what's happening out in the world today. And all these third spaces are disappearing in the city and been disappearing this last decade, these last 14 years, and yet it's been the opposite with Word Up. It started with an abandoned pharmacy across the street from United Palace. I'm walking by, Armando Batista's there. They didn't even have any lights, just a few used books. And I think I was with some young people. We ended up coming back. Then you have the 164 location. Now you have this location. So while in the rest of New York City, it's becoming more expensive, and any space that doesn't require you to consume and pay for something, those spaces are disappearing, right? But Word Up keeps growing, right? And it's with the help of people like us. And $5 a month ain't shit, man. So.
I also realized I have this one particular QR where if you sign up through here, then you get $5 rebate for some reason. I mean, the company set it up so you can sign up for $5 a month and then also get $5 back. So I'll pass this around in case you think about it. But also wanted to shout out in terms of like supporting arts organizations in the house. The Quayle, Laura Pigram's here, the founder of Quayle Journal, which is so important to like all our communities and all of the books that we've been reading over the like last decade or so. I know a lot of them have been birthed that quick, like in the early stages. People met their ages there. People like and the JP's doing something at it, and the conference itself is coming up soon, so we have postcards here if you're interested, but also another great place to support.
I remember that space on Broadway because it looked like the bookstore, like a Mundo store. It looked like a Mundo store, but for books. And that was beautiful to me. That was so beautiful to me because it was just like, oh yes. Yeah, it was really great.
All right. So I'm gonna just say, you can hear me, right?
But use the mic because you're live.
Okay, first, I'm gonna apologize for my nasally voice because I had allergies and it turned into a sinus infection and it was a whole thing. I promise I'm not contagious. It's annoying right now. That's all. So thank y'all for being here and celebrating JP and his amazing expanded book. This thing is incredible and beautiful, and I'm honored to be here with you. Every time I'm with you, bro, and around you, man, I meet people, and it just reaffirms every time that you're a solid brother doing work in the community. If we had 10 million people doing this kind of work, I can't even imagine, the damage we could do to capitalism and all of this exploitation and shit that's going on. So, I celebrate you, man. I'm grateful for you, bro, every day. There's a lot of brothers in here too. Y'all can't see the audience, but this is a beautiful thing, man. Celebrating literature and celebrating each other. Usually literary events is 80% women or more, but this time the brothers came out to support, and I appreciate that. And Francis Mateo is like the ubre, super talented writer and translator, and we're going to be working together very soon. You're going to hear more about that. And I'm just glad to be here sharing time and space with both of you and with all of y'all. So I gotta read JP's bio because JP is super accomplished, but we're the same way. We don't really like to listen to our bios. We just want to keep it moving and keep building. But I feel like it's really important, right? So JP Infante is the author of On the Tip of Your Mother's Tongue and Aquí y Allá, un retrato de la comunidad dominicana in Washington Heights. He's the winner of the PEN America Robert J. Dow Short Story Prize and 30 West Wavelengths Chapbook Contest. So this expanded edition is from that original chapbook. It includes an extended essay, which will be published in Mosaic Magazine, hopefully any day now. We're waiting, which is a brilliant essay called On Screens. And I think extra short story? Without a Big One, which is one of my favorite stories in the world, and hopefully JP will read from that today. His writing has appeared in Quayle, The Poetry Project, and elsewhere. He has been awarded scholarships and fellowships from the New York State Writers Institute, PEN America, and the Center for Fiction. He holds an MFA from the New School. Currently, he's an organizer and facilitator for the Liberation Program at the Brotherhood Sister Soul, a nonprofit in Harlem that has served Black and Latinx youth with wraparound services for almost 30 years. And while we're on the topic of asking for support for incredible nonprofit organizations, Brotherhood Sister Soul should be at the top of your list as well. I donate all the time. I'm a regular contributor because I think it's that important. Not only that, it's up the block from where I grew up, Hamilton Place. And I'm like, this is incredible. I wish that would have been around way, way back when. It's a beautiful organization and a beautiful new building, right? That they got going on. So, without further ado, JP is going to read to us from his book. Everybody, give it up for JP.
Thank you for that. What do I read? So, what we're thinking is we're going to read Buying Cocaine. Nico, what's good? Read a little bit of that in English, then Francis will read it in Spanish. The whole idea with this, I'll start yapping now. So it was a chapbook. It had 3 pieces, right? Really short. Then last year, Josh Dale, the editor-in-chief, co-founder of 30 West, was like, yo, we want to re-release it. We want to do this, we want to do that. And I said, that's fine, but I just want to add Spanish to it. I want to also for it to be in Spanish because it was difficult communicating to folks in the Heights and over there, like what it is I'm doing, right? And he told me like that's very difficult. A translation is very difficult. And I said, not only that, but I also want it to be on the same way, and I want it in the back, and I want you to be able to flip it. So it doesn't feel like...
You made it more complicated.
Basically, but it doesn't feel... So if you see it this way, it feels like this is the book. If you look at it, it feels like this is the book. As opposed to it being like halfway through, and it becomes like there's a hierarchy in terms of language. And he was like, that's very difficult. And I was like, yeah, let's do it.
You were like, I know people.
And poor Josh, man, God bless him, man. 30 West is a really small, again, another nonprofit, very, very small, but he was like, let's do it. He was up for it. And then we got into the translation process, which was
difficult.
Difficult. And Francis came through, like, Francis was just like amazing within an issue. But then with the other stuff, I wanted it for it to be more of like a general Spanish. And that shit was a fucking, it was so difficult. But luckily, I wasn't alone. And shout out to Rosana Calderon, back there, y'all see with the Yankee hat, like a Yankee hat convention. She came through and she just cleaned it up and just went, did amazing work with it, right? All that to say that, and I made a post of this, like I'm gonna get a lot of the credit for this. And as you see, it has my name real big there. But there's a lot of people that helped with this, you know, that made this happen. And over here we have Jason, a doctor from Columbia University. Hey. So,
Angel. Angel.
What did I say?
Jason.
Now he got the braids as Jason. Okay, déjame ver, vamos a ver, let's start.
Just while he's picking, there's a dope book by this Mexican brother named Jose Olivares called Promises of Gold that has that same format. Yeah, when you flip it around, which is also...
There's a South American editorial thing that they do that on books from the mid-20th century writers. That is just the whole flip thing. And I bought one of them at Word Up. That's so funny. It was a while. Yeah, or should I? Yeah, I bought one of those at Word Up that you can flip, and that was like, that's why it's just like, oh, you went old school on that. That to me, that was like, you went old school on that. Now that you went, not that you did it like the new thing, but like, oh, you went old school. That's great.
Because I actually got it from Mangas. Mangas.
Yeah.
También.
We got Sheila over there. Hey. I bet. So I'm gonna start off with Buying Cocaine. Then Francis is gonna do Comprando Cocaine. Buying Cocaine. 1. Bring an Afro-Latino black friend with you. Don't confuse your Spanish friends with your Spanish-speaking friends. Your dealer has never been to Spain and will pretend he doesn't know English if 2 white guys approach him. Your dealer thinks white is white the same way you think black is black. Your dealer won't overcharge you if you're with a non-white person. 2. I'm lying. This isn't about you. Your dealer will overcharge you not because you're white, but because you can afford it. This neighborhood is no different than that resort you went to in the Caribbean. Your dealer is more American than you think. He's an aspiring capitalist, just like those third world resort workers. Plátanos with salami, Brugal with Coca-Cola, that light purple juicy warm home inside that dark pitch black woman. You were overcharged there, you will be overcharged here. 3. Focus on the coke. When you get off the George Washington Bridge, you'll be on 178th Street in Fort Washington by the bus terminal. It will look like the UN. You'll see brown, white, and black junkies from all over the world. This ain't Bright Lights big city. This is real cosmopolitanism. The neighborhood is made up of Americans, including law-abiding and undocumented citizens. Forget about them. 4, drive down 178th Street and make a left on Wadsworth Avenue. Ignore the merengue spilling out of windows and reggaeton left over from cars flying by. Ignore the people on plastic chairs in front of tenement buildings, drinking and celebrating God knows what on St. Nicholas Avenue. Throw your 50-cent CD out of the car window. Ironically, playing a 50-cent CD you paid for proves your whiteness and does not camouflage you. 5, be yourself. Be white. Don't be like those dealers on the corner. It won't help in any way. The truth is that these dealers love whiteness more than you or they could ever understand. Read Black Skin, White Mask by Frantz Fanon or Wilhelm von Shadow's chapter summaries in Liberator magazine. 6, avoid walking by the church. If you pass by on foot, the churchgoers will notice when you forget to cross yourself. Plus, they'll know you weren't there last Sunday. For them, it's about community and charity, and you're an outsider that hasn't donated. 7, while looking for parking, you'll discover a university for a specific group of people is a block away from your dealer. Park your car in front of the George Washington High School. The dropout rate is as high as the property tax money going into the school is low. 8, don't be surprised if you see people you identify with. Rent is cheap. Rent is more expensive than ever, so a lot of us are moving out. Rent is cheap. Consider moving to the area. 9, Mayor Giuliani cleaned the city, but his hands ain't clean. His soldiers used a plunger on a Haitian immigrant while they protected and served. Fortunately, you're far from dark-skinned. You're far from a dark-skinned Haitian, so you're safe. 10, don't badmouth the DAS dealer who sold you the flower that ain't numb your tongue. Most of these dealers have dealt with each other, and if they haven't, they will. A few of them are more industrious than you, investing in laundromats until the dryer stops spinning, the money's clean, and the laundromat becomes a local business like an actual laundromat. Most of the corner dealers are already in jail. Some of these blocks are traps, smaller than small towns. Read Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, and James Joyce, The Dubliners. Number 11, when you get to your dealer's block, avoid Terrence. He's around your age. He can tell you're white and not Eastern European, and he holds this against you. He read A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid and is still angry. He's in that prestigious school that didn't accept you, even though both of you had identical grades. You'll roll your eyes and blame affirmative action. Terrence will suck his teeth in concert with legacy preferences. 12, don't smile at Josefina. She'll be waiting in front of your dealer's building for her father to pick her up. Josefina's father, the taxi driver, does nothing except work, read the newspaper, and drive his daughter around. He only knows baseball. He's never played golf and thinks Tiger Woods is a place in upstate New York, and yet owns a 4-iron. Stay away from his daughter. He's old school and was oppressed in the days when blatant oppression was in style. He'll hack you with his golf club as if St. Nicholas Avenue was that puddle of a river dividing Hispaniola and you've mispronounced the Spanish word. Read Edwidge Nanticat's The Farming of Bones. 13, you'll find the dealer waiting for you on the 3rd floor. When you tell him I sent you, he'll take out the Coke. Do not tell him how you know me or ask him how he knows me. He counts the money repeatedly and you grow anxious. You fear he'll rob you like the last dealer from the hood you last scored at. He won't small talk. He won't tell you he's dealt to my mother behind my back. But this story isn't about that. When he finally gives you the stuff, you'll feel relieved and jokingly ask how much cut is in it. The dealer will remind you that nothing is pure. That's cocaine. And for the first 3 pieces of the collection, believe me, 3 pieces of the collection, 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 3 pie That was Francis who translated these first two pieces.
Oh yes, because the book is divided into different things, essays, and this, which is the buying cocaine. When JP contacted me, he's like, "Listen,
His voice, he projects.
I need
Theater.
I need to have this translated." And one of the things I was like, "But what do you need exactly? Do you need a formal translation, like a regular, like a normal Spanish, or you want something that's like some dude from the hood that's just like doing the things, or should I honor more the way you wrote in English?" So that's one of the conversations that we were having back and forth. And I was like, "Listen, I'm going to translate something for you. I'm going to send it to you, and you tell me if you like it or not." And then he says yes, and I was like, "Okay, so I'm going to go that way." Because translating is a thing that even I know that if I'm going to read it now, I'm going to be like, "I should have changed that." Because it's a never-ending thing. And but I hope that he's happy with it, because when I finished it and I sent it in the first draft, I was like, if you're happy with it, then we're good. I mean, if you laugh at things, if you that's it. We're in a good place. So let's read the first.
Let's see if you did a good job.
Yeah, please.
Tomás también. Okay.
Such pressure. El tomo y presidio. Cordón umbilical. 1. Salías corriendo de la escuela donde ella te esperaba. La miraste a la cara y oliste alcohol en su aliento. Al cruzar la calle le hablaste del profesor Castro y de cómo amenazó con darle una pela a cualquier niño que se peleara en la clase. Ella te tomó de la mano y frunció el ceño. "Yo lo pico", dijo. El chirrido de unos neumáticos paralizó todo. El carro casi te atropella. Ella te aló del hombro y gritó, "¡La luz amarilla!". El conductor se sacudió en el carro agarrado del volante. Ella te soltó el hombro cuando llegaste a la acera. El apretón, tu moratón. No le tenías miedo al conductor ni al profesor Castro, sino que temías por ellos. 2. Antes de salir de Rikers, tomaste tus pertenencias del armario. La guagua estaba llena de madres, hermanas, hijas, niños pequeños y el calentón del verano. Una persona molestaba a otra, dizque por un asiento que le pertenecía a otra persona. La mujer corpulenta le gritó a tu madre. Tu madre te lanzó a tu hermanita de 1 mes y se enfrentó cara a cara con la mujer corpulenta, gritándole mucho más fuerte. El conductor de la guagua le suplicaba a las mujeres mientras forcejeaba con el timón de la guagua. Pensaste que el conductor llevaría a tu madre de regreso a la cárcel por estar peleando, pero era solamente miedo. No le temías a la cárcel ni a la mujer corpulenta. Temías dejar caer a tu hermanita. 3. Eso fue antes de tu hermana, antes de muchas otras cosas. Vivías en un apartamento con una mujer y su hijo pequeño. Los ratones dormían debajo de una montaña de juguete en la sala. Una cola como de gusano se deslizaba entre figurines de acción, cabello de muñecas y animales de peluche. No recuerdas ni la cocina, ni el baño, o la mujer que le alquilaba a tu madre. Recuerdas tu pequeño dormitorio y las paredes azules. Había una ventana rota y un radiador frío junto a la cama doble. Durante toda la noche temblabas en sus brazos. Por la mañana te ponías el gorro, el abrigo y los guantes para ir a la escuela, y aún así sentías un frío colarse por las grietas en la ventana. No sabías si lo que sentías era miedo o frío, o si existía alguna diferencia. Comprando cocaína. Lleva contigo a un amigo afrolatino o negro. No confundas a tus amigos españoles con tus amigos que hablan español. Tu proveedor nunca ha estado en España y fingirá que no sabe ni un chin de inglés si se le acercan 2 tipos blancos. Tu proveedor piensa que blanco es blanco, al igual como tú crees que negro es negro. Tu proveedor nunca te cobrará de más si te acompaña una persona de color. 2. Embuste. No se trata de ti. Tu proveedor te cobrará de más no porque seas blanco, sino porque puede. Este barrio no es tan diferente a ese resort al que fuiste en el Caribe. Tu proveedor es más americano de lo que crees. Es un aspirante a capitalista como esos trabajadores hoteleros del tercer mundo. plátanos con salami, brugal con Coca-Cola, la cosita húmeda y jugosa de color morado celeste de esa mujer tan negra como el carbón. Allá te cobraron de más, aquí también lo harán. 3. Concéntrate en el perico. Cuando salgas del puente George Washington estarás en la calle 178 y Fort Washington, junto a la terminal de guaguas. Parecerá las Naciones Unidas. Verás tecatos blancos, marrones y negros de todas partes del mundo. Esto no es Bright Lights Big City, luces de neón. Esto es el verdadero cosmopolitismo. El barrio está compuesto por norteamericanos, incluyendo indocumentados respetuosos de las leyes. Olvídalos. 4. Maneja por la calle 178 y gira a la izquierda en la avenida Wadsworth. Ignora el merengón que sale por las ventanas y el reggaetón que dejan atrás los carros que pasan a toda marcha. Ignora a los tigres en sus sillas de plástico frente a los edificios, bebiendo y celebrando Dios que sabe qué vaina en la avenida San Nicolás. Tira tu CD de 50 Cent por la ventana del carro. Irónicamente, escuchar un CD de 50 Cent que has comprado prueba tu blancura y no lo oculta. 5. Sé tú mismo, sé blanco. No seas como los maleantes de las esquinas, no te ayudará en nada. La verdad es que el maleanteo ama la blancura más de lo que tú a ellos o podrían ellos entender, o ellos podrían llegar a entender. Lee Black Skin, White Mask, Piel Negra, Máscaras Blancas, de Franz Fanon, o el resumen de los capítulos de Wilhelm von Schadow en la Liberator Magazine. 6. Evita caminar por la iglesia. Si pasas a pie, los feligreses se darán cuenta que olvidaste hacer la señal de la cruz. Además sabrán que no estuviste en la misa del domingo pasado. Para ellos se trata de comunidad y caridad, y tú eres un extraño que todavía no ha donado. 7. Mientras buscas parqueo, descubrirás que una universidad para un grupo específico de personas está a una cuadra de distancia de tu concesionario. Parquea frente a la secundaria George Washington. La tasa de deserción escolar es tan alta como tan bajo el dinero del impuesto a la propiedad que va a la escuela. 8. No te sorprendas al ver las personas con las que puedas identificarte. La renta está más cara que nunca. Por eso muchos nos estamos mudando. La renta es barata, considera mudarte a esa zona. 9. El alcalde Giuliani limpió la ciudad, pero sus manos no están limpias. Sus soldados usaron un desatascador en un inmigrante haitiano mientras protegían y servían. Afortunadamente, tú estás lejos de esa piel oscura haitiana, así que estás a salvo. 10. No hables mal del último jodedor que te vendió la harina que ahora te anestesia la lengua. La mayoría de estos distribuidores se han tratado entre sí, y si todavía no lo han hecho, lo harán. Algunos de ellos son más industriosos que tú. Invierten en lavanderías que hasta que sus secadoras paren de girar, ya el dinero estará limpio. Y la lavandería pasará a ser un negocio local como Lavandería Real. La mayoría de estos proveedores ya están presos. Algunos de estos ya están presos. Algunos de estos bloques son trampas, más pequeños que pequeñas ciudades. Lee a Winesburg, Ohio, de Sherwood Wood, y los dublineses de James Joyce. ¿Sigo? Sí. A ver. 11. Cuando llegues al bloque de tu distribuidor, evita a Terrence. Él tiene más o menos tu edad. Se da cuenta que eres blanco y no de Europa del Este, y él te lo echará en la cara. Él legó un lugar pequeño de Jamaica Kincaid y todavía está enojado. Él está en esta prestigiosa escuela que no te aceptó a pesar de que los dos tenían notas idénticas. Tú pondrás los ojos en blanco y culparás a la acción afirmativa. Terrence soltará un chuipi y contrarrestará con admisión de legado. 12. Que ni se te ocurra sonreírle a Josefina. Ella estará esperando por su papá frente al edificio de tu proveedor. El papá de Josefina, el taxista, no hace otra cosa que no sea trabajar, leer el periódico y llevar a su hija de un lado a otro. Él solo sabe de béisbol. Nunca ha jugado golf y cree que Tiger Woods es un lugar al norte en el estado de Nueva York. Y sin embargo, es dueño de un palo de golf de hierro número 4. Aléjate de su hija. Él es vieja escuela y fue oprimido en los días en que estaba de moda la opresión descarada. Él te va a entrar a ramplimazo con su palo de golf, como si la avenida San Nicolás fuera ese charco de río que divide la isla española y hubieras pronunciado una palabra en español de la manera incorrecta. Lee Cosecha de Huesos de Edgewick Danticat. 13. Encontrarás al proveedor esperándote en el tercer piso. Cuando le digas que yo te mandé, él sacará el perico. No le diga de dónde y cómo me conoce, ni le pregunte a él dónde y cómo me conoce. Él cuenta el dinero una y otra vez y te llenas de ansiedad. Temes que te robe como lo hizo tu último proveedor la última vez que fuiste al barrio a capear. Él no estará en habladera. No te dirá que le ha facilitado producto a mi mamá a mis espaldas. Pero esta historia no se trata de eso. Cuando finalmente te dé el producto, te sentirás aliviado y le preguntarás a modo de broma cuánto es el corte que lleva. El traficante te recordará que nada es puro.
I'm gonna just write in English to have him translate.
Ni se te ocurre hablarle a Josefina. So I have just a quick question. Words like parqueo, that in Spanish-speaking countries are like estacionamiento, right? Like those decisions, like what was that process for you, right? To honor that word like parqueo, because that's the word we use here. You know what I'm saying? We don't have the formal word like they would have over there. So there's moments in the translation where I see that you made those choices.
Yeah.
And I study translation, so I'm nerding out right now over how dope this translation was. So I just wonder about that process.
It's, for example, the word guagua, which is bus, but guagua is only used in the Caribbean. This is Cuba, Dominican Republic, they use the word guagua, because in South America, guagua is a kid. So you try to go like, how can I make it feel more Dominican for the people that are reading it? Because I remember reading, I don't know what book from Junot Diaz that I was reading in Spanish, just for the hell of it. And I was just like, where does this story take place? Because it was not, there was nothing that I read in English. There was negocios, right? There was nothing that it was drowned, yeah. There was nothing that I read in English, and I was just like, did somebody did something to this? Because I don't understand anything. And I just wanted to keep that in mind, and that's one of the things that I talked to him about, and I was just like, I'm just going to try to do something that is very Dominican, that has that flavor, because I can use in parqueo, estacionamiento, I can use a bunch of other things, but I was just, if I say parqueo, it looks like there's a kid from up here that is talking, and I just didn't want to lose that essence of that kid talking, this kid that knows the area, that probably was born in a household where they spoke Spanish only, and then he had to code switch when he was outside to talk to his friends. I was coming up the hill now, and I was like, there used to be a lot of more Spanish in this neighborhood. Like you could hear more Spanish and more stores outside. It used to be like we were talking about El Mundo and that stuff like that. They used to happen a lot more, but not anymore. So I can't imagine for people growing at that time to have that, but yet the first language is English.
Yeah.
But I'm going sideways because it's just. But yeah, it's just to choose what word is going to represent the style of a story. Who is he? Who is that kid?
Yeah.
And depending on who that kid is, like the choices are going to be made from there, and hopefully he'll approve on those choices. And if he doesn't, then we'll go back to the drawing board and we're like, okay, let's see how we can make it. And because I couldn't make it, because one of the things that I talked to him was like, when the people are talking, when they're in quotes, they're going to be Dominican. Like when the mother said, "Yo te pico."
Yes.
Like that's something that you would not.
That's when I knew. So
that was on point. Yeah.
he said. So I sent him in English. I say, "I'll cut you," right? I send it to him. Then he's like, "Yo, I'm just gonna do maybe the first one." He was very like hesitant about it, which maybe even respected even more because he's being intentional. He cares about the work. He sends it to me. I'm reading it, and that's exactly what my mother said. Te pico. Or lo pico, like I'll cut you, teacher. And just reading it, I got fucking chills. Because again, there's so many limits to translation, right? And so much of the challenge was like, yo, how do you capture this very particular Spanish, specifically for the first 3 pieces, which Francis translated. After that, there's a poem which wasn't translated because it was too nuanced. I didn't want to go that route. And then a short story and an essay. The short story and the essay, I wanted it to be general Spanish. I wanted it to be accessible to everyone. But these first 3 pieces are really about Washington Heights. So a very particular experience. I don't know if my boy Rugged over here reads it. He's gonna be like, yeah, like this is gonna. He probably takes it for granted because all of that he's gonna know word for word. So it was super important for me, for the sound to be there, for the sound. You have to keep in mind that reading and writing are not natural. It's just some technology. Reading and writing is not natural. It's an invention, right? Speaking and listening, that's what's human, right? That's what's human. And just watching Francis in plays and reading El Alto in particular, sound. Me and Roberto were talking about that. There's jealousy. Like, this motherfucker has the sound. He has the sound. Yeah. And that's what it is. You saw when, Francis, right now, you were reading it. It's the sound, it's the sound. When we're walking down the street, when we're walking down St. Nick, when we're listening. Diana mentioned that when I'm coming from Jersey, she was walking around and she was just listening, like the sounds of it. Josefina Baez, her work, she talks about her process is just walking down Washington Heights and she tries to memorize the signs, but while memorizing the signs, she's listening to stuff, right? So there's something about sound that's so important to, I think, literature in general, but especially in translation, which goes completely against what Toni Morrison said in the Paris Review. She said that she writes so that it works on the written page. This is Toni Morrison. I'm not Toni Morrison, right? I write the opposite. I pay for the ear, right? And again, with the translation, with those 3 pieces, as soon as that shit dropped, I was thinking, yo, Francis, I'm gonna come up with some money, have Francis translated, and I still won't have the money for that. That's a different way. We're waiting for that grant to come in. But.
No, and I think what you capture also, which is so important, is that it's a satirical and biting piece, because it is saying to this white dude or person, like, look how much I have to know about you, right? Like I can give you guideposts, Sherwood Anderson's, you know, I can give you all these books. I can give you, there's a list of books named in there. Look how much I know about you, and you know, you fiend and you need this. You don't know shit about what goes on here. So not only do I gotta know my world, but I know yours. So I'm gonna clown you. Yeah, I'm gonna show you, but guess what? I'm gonna clown you too. So that also comes through in the Spanish, and I think that's the rub, because then that's like cultural context, right? That has to come through. You translating to, and you know, an audience speaking another language that has maybe like a different cultural context, even though joseando is joseando, so to speak. Right? But I think I enjoyed that. I thought that was dope. And I wanted to ask you to maybe talk a little bit about the process you went through, you know, and out of what place this was coming out of, because the satire, there's like an ironic humor, you know, which is dope. Like, I love that you put Wadsworth in there, because I first learned about ATF by going to Wadsworth. Like, I had no idea what ATF was. And they were like, yo, bro, if ATF comes in here right now, we're fucked. I was like, what?
Wow.
Bro, you don't know how much shit is going on right now in here? And that's when I was like, oh, wow. So when I saw Wadsworth, it was like, bing, you know. But the thought process of putting that on paper and making it that biting second person kind of perspective, you know what I'm saying?
So I was in, I don't know, it was 06, 07. I'm older than I look. I was at the New York State's Writers Institute, right? I got the DEI scholarship, right? So it was super white. I was the only person of color there. And I was at Skidmore University. It was so fucking weird. Like, their downtown, there's like one street. There's like a statue of a horse there and shit. And I remember being there and just coming to terms with just whiteness, right? Because there's a distinction. I try to tell this to young people, especially teens. Sometimes you got to tell it to adults. There's whiteness and there's people of European descent, or white people, right? 2 different things. I know a lot of white folks, and the older I get, who are really allies, who are really about it. even more than our own folks, bro. Like they feel like they have to show and prove because they know they're privileged, right? So being there, just seeing this fucking privilege, right? Because the shit about poor people are very hateful, bro.
Oh, yeah.
Poor people have, myself, and I see somebody who has a little bit more than me, I'm like, you know? So I remember just being there, being like, yo, how these motherfuckers, like, yo, there's so much wealth, there's so much. So there was this resentment there being there. So after Jamaica Kincaid, a small place, short story, a collection at the bottom of the river, Jamaica Kincaid is brilliant, from Antigua. She was there, she was speaking, and I happened to buy there a small place while I was at the retreat, or the writing retreat, and reading it, and she starts it in the second person, speaking to like a tourist coming to the country. So right away I thought about Washington Heights, right? And Rugged could tell you too, my boy, we grew up on the same block and everything. It's just like cocaine, drugs, especially for young black boys, Latinx boys, just a rite of passage. You're gonna probably back up, you're gonna make a delivery, you're gonna try to hustle, you're gonna hustle here and there. It's just like everybody's there. And then some of them become rappers and they be like, oh, Scarface. No, you weren't. Everybody's just like, unfortunately, it's just the right to everyone, especially in the Heights. And Divino's from the Deuce too, so he knows how that is. Like, you got like 3-4 spots, like right next to each other. You know how they make your money. So that was in my head. Jamaica Kincaid's a small place. So when I went in there in this white space with these, which I don't know how to feel about this, but I was speaking to that audience, so the young white people, the professors, and giving them instructions on how to buy cocaine. Because those were the people that would come, or some of the cussies would be white people to buy cocaine, right? And that's where it was coming from. It was coming from a place of like, letting them know, I know where you're coming from, right? But I want you to know this is what you're walking into. This is what you're not seeing. It's much more than that, right? And the older I get, the more spaces. I go to different spaces. How do I phrase this? So in my writing career, the older I get, even if I go to BIPOC spaces, class, I see people from different classes, right? And their relationship to drugs is very interesting. It was at the new school and at a party, whatever, when motherfuckers was casually doing coke, and I was like, oh my God. Come on, let's go over here. Some decorum, you know? Nah, this shit is so like, and it was mind blowing, right? So all of this was in my head. I'm in fucking Saratoga Springs. It was just weird. I was the token person. I'm self-aware. I know what's going on here. I didn't have to pay for shit. So I was speaking to that audience. It was like all these things came to coalesce, or crash, and they became that. So me reading that to them, you know, they were loving it. But it felt like it was like a fuck you to them. But then it becomes something else because everyone here knows what I'm talking about.
That I'll fuck you to them that like goes over their head.
It depends on the audience. They're gonna get a different story.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. There you go.
Like here, the story is what you wrote. But over there, it's like, oh yeah, I wish you would take notes.
Yeah.
It becomes a thing about structure.
I'm not gonna be Scarface. I'm just gonna be myself.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like I say. Yeah.
Don't buy baggy pants to go pick up. It's interesting you mentioned just now class and the relationship that class has then, not just the drugs, but consuming drugs. But then at the same time in the book, the relationship to using drugs, you know, and it's either in the essay or I think it's in the essay, right, on screens that you were like, we were just taught to say no to drugs.
Oh, right.
As opposed to what drugs meant, what the relationship of drugs was in the community, whether it was like a way to make money, a way to eat, a way not to starve, not to freeze to death, etc. But also people's struggle,
Right.
you know? And so what's interesting is in the book, I feel like it's very smoothly done. There's a kind of compassion. There's a kind of like understanding, a kind of no harm in the way that the people who are struggling with this disease are portrayed and the situations that the characters are going through. It's, you know, because some people tell our stories and tell our experiences in this harmful way. And so the relationship to it and to that world, in emphasizing no harm, we talked about this, right? Harm reduction, it almost like shines a big ass flashlight on the other side of it and the privilege that people have with using it. It makes me think about it immediately. Like I say, man, there's such kindness here, there's such care. But it immediately makes me think of where there is lack of care and how that's all I've ever heard or seen when it comes to that world. You know what I'm saying? Right. So your thought process on ensuring that as you approach the page, you know, because that's something that I think a lot of us when we write and tell our stories don't always necessarily, you know, we want to make it raw and shit. We're not mob deep. What's the name of it? MOP, you know, like we're MOP and shit, right? But care is so important in how we tell our stories and the humanizing of us. Right. You know what I'm saying? So I wonder, like, if you can talk about, you know, were there any pitfalls or traps, or like, was there times when you caught yourself like, oh shit, what am I doing? Like, you know what I'm saying? Or you had to, or was this always something that was just always at the center of your mind? You know what I'm saying? Like you didn't get caught up in that.
It's weird. Like everything makes sense in retrospect when you look back at it, right? Every choice you make on the page, everything you expose, everything you say, is covering a silence. You're always high, like, you know, if you say anything, it's because there's something you're not saying, implicit in that, always, right? So when it came to on the tip of your mother's tongue, the chapter, which is the first 3 pieces, which Francis translated, it's in the second person. There was a point I was super like obsessed with the second person. Why do I keep writing the second? And I didn't know why. And literary theory, there's some theories around that say that even therapists use with their clients, they have them write in the second person because there's a you're distant to it, right? What the second person also affords is a kind of dissociation, right?
Yeah.
So just imagine being a child, or even as an adult, when you're having these traumatic experiences or wild shit is going on around you, you're almost experiencing it in the second person. You're almost above it all, right? That's why those traumatic experiences you remember everything about it, right? So there was a point I was writing about these things, personal experience, real shit, in the second person. So it was a shield there. It was right? And then I wrote in the second person, about a big one, and that's also in the second person, but it's fiction. So now they call it autofiction, which is just another way to sell books. It's just, but again, there's a removal there. And then if you notice the last piece, the most recent piece, it's in the first person, and I'm speaking directly to the experience, right? So I think it's easier for me on the page to be gentle, to be understanding, to care for these people, some of them real, some of them made up. It's easier on the page. It's more difficult in real life, right? It's more difficult for me to portray a family member this way on the page. But in real life, I'm not showing up that way, to be real. I'm just not. Depends on how I'm eating, how I'm sleeping, what's going on. And everything's, I'm a better human being on the page. I'm smarter on the page. I'm funnier on the page. And the real world is different, you know? One day I'm about harm reduction, the next day in the real world I'm punitive. I'm like, yeah, send the motherfuckers to jail. It vacillates. So all that to say,
it's the real world,
right?
It's the real world. Baby.
So to answer your question, on the page it's easier. Like, you know, just being like honest and vulnerable, it's easier. In the real, that's the challenge, you know? Even in explaining things to my daughter, like, when we were living out here in the Heights, we would walk around in the streets and you would see people with mental health issues, and she would like feel a certain way, you know? And I would tell her, oh, they probably have mental health issues. It could be drug abuse, but I always say mental health because that's a little easier to complain. And she was like 4 and 5, and she was like, okay, boom. But then what would happen is that she would see certain people and be like, oh, that's mental health. And I'm like, no. And it would be like some indigenous looking person or some black or brown person. And I was just like, no, man, I was trying to figure out what it was. And it was that she started associating like someone having mental health issues with looking poor or looking visibly disheveled or faded clothing. So she started seeing folks who have mental health issues dressed a certain way, looking disheveled. So then she would see anybody dressed a certain way and be like, oh. So then I had to unpack that, and I'm like, fuck, she's 5. How the fuck do I do it? You know?
So difference became like...
Yeah, but all that to say that even like as an adult, it's difficult to navigate that in the real world. How you generous, how you gentle, how you open, how you vulnerable in the real world. When I gotta get to work at 9 and you know, like, stressing X, Y, Z. It's always easier on the page, I think.
Yeah, you know, because it's like, there's a kind of cowardice too that some people, you know, and I could be a dick too when I think about this with people writing. There's a kind of cowardice that a lot of people take to the page and feel like this is gonna be my get back.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's why I asked that question, because it's always Kiese Lehman, you know, a writer I really admire. He always says, in your writing, treat your people with tenderness and care. You know, when you go to that page, I think that's like so important. You mentioned something about dissociating, and you know, and like things like Marxist criticism, they talk about fragmentation.
Yeah, oof.
Right, how like the ills of capitalism cause fragmentation, cause us to break apart. And one of the things I love about the characters, both in the poems and in the short fiction, is that we see that fragmentation and dissociation, but I also see it kind of break into three parts, right? I see it as witnessing, processing, right? And then almost like a mix of confessing and acting on it, right? On the witnessing and processing. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, like that breakdown of how the characters are witnessing. And like I think about Ray, right? And how Ray sees something. By the way, Mr. Rodriguez had me out. It's like, it's respect, bro. And they're like, all right, you gotta read it. But I think about how he witnesses, you know, Mary, Nilda, the boyfriend, you know, Gregorio, his stepfather, etc. And then tries to kind of process the situation and thinks about the little things he's heard here and there in order to determine, okay, how to act. You know what I'm saying? And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that process, you know, about like writing that or thinking through that, you know. And if it's too granular, you know, I get it. Sometimes I get all professorial and shit.
Nah, I like that shit.
So,
I feel sorry for yeah, but so much of it is I think how you go about telling the story determines so much about the way it's received, right? So it's in the second person, it's in present tense, if I'm not mistaken, right? So if it's when you write something in present tense, it's like, oh, I'm sitting here right now, Francis is to my left, Roberto's to my right, the light is hitting my eye, somebody's walking by, so the story's that, like in real time. So that requires something of the reader, but then it's perceived in a certain, it comes off in a certain way, right? And what I was trying to do is try to get at like how difficult it is for young people, no matter even for adults, just to process what's going on. Because even in this situation, you're asking me a question, and I'm giving you an answer. But again, like I said earlier, there's some silences in my answer, something I'm not telling you, right? So now imagine being a kid and dealing with adults. Look back to when you were a child, right? And you were trying to make sense of the world. There was what your parents told you, and then there was what you saw outside, right? Like parents, adults, when they interact with young people, they always, and educators specifically, they always have to deal with this question, which is, do I prepare this child, whether they be my child or my student, for the world as it is, which is a world with thieves and crooks, or for the world that I envision and I want, which is a world where people are nice, they say please and thank you, they turn the other cheek, right? So how do you do that, right? And then in some other cases, it's like, there's some situation that's going on in the adult world that might be beneficial for the child to know, to be prepared for. But then you wonder, if the child knows this, what's that gonna do to their state of mind, and so on, right? So I was just trying to like consider all these things from the point of view of like 8, 9-year-old boy, right? There's so much that happens in the city, in these neighborhoods, that have been adversely affected by the prison industrial complex, which is, there's so much stuff that's unfair that's happening to their parents, and parents have to decide, do I tell them like, you know what, this world is really unfair, or do I tell them, no, just go to school, look, there was a black president, you can be president too. So just navigating that. So even for the mother in that short story, Mary, like you see her trying to navigate that, but there's addiction there, her partner's in jail, they're very young, the parents are very young.
That's hustling.
Right, and this is fiction, right, or what they call autofiction. But you see how I present that same scenario, that same situation in the essay, but it's as an adult making sense of it, right? So
and talking about in the essay, working with young people.
exactly.
And then having to deal with that same question, right? With young
Right.
people.
Yeah. So in the essay, like on screens, which finishes with Edwin, you have the Heights mayor here, Edwin. Round of applause for Edwin. He's gonna hate I said that. So the collection is a poem, a prose poem, then like a nonfiction creative writing essay, then a fiction, then a creative nonfiction essay, which gets into like the death of my stepfather, the death of my mother, like I reference it and how I process all that. And in there, I talk about, like, I used to teach I used to teach in the DOE, then I taught at the Brotherhood Sisters Soul, working directly with youth, with young people, Black and Latinx youth, right? And then I had to stop because something was glitching in my brain, right? I would talk to some 15, 16-year-old young women, and I swear to God, like, they would talk about their childhood, and I wouldn't be talking to them. I'd be talking to my mother, who had me when she was 16. I would be talking to a number of young people, but one in particular from Capotillo who just got here, who Danny actually came and spoke to him, and I spoke to my kids and met him. He's just this tigueraje, this swag and everything, and
it's
quick and really
Capotillo.
smart. And talking to him, and I was like, oh shit, this was my stepfather, right? And I had to reflect. I'm like, why am I doing this? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing time travel here. A lot of what I do in the community, even this right now, is me trying to do what some folks did for me and what some folks didn't do for my parents, for my uncle, for the people I know. So I'm trying to undo that in 2025 when it should have been done in the late 80s and early 90s, right? Which is, I don't know how to feel about that, but something was off. And I tell a story about a young woman, 15, 14-year-old, just talking to me and my co-facilitator. We're in Harlem River Bank, and she goes like, oh yeah. She mentions like, because my father, he did 10 years in jail. And I knew that my father did time, right? But I didn't know why. And then she goes, oh yeah, because he ended up shooting the person who molested me. And that shit was like, in real time, I'm kind of processing what I do. But then that brought up so much. And then like the thought right then is looking at my co-facilitator thinking, yo, we have to debrief, we have to figure out these services, like you go into work mode. But that moment in particular was like, yo, I don't think I could do this any longer, right? But because of the organization I work with, I moved from working directly with youth, now I'm with development. At the Brotherhood Sisters Soul, like we put the child first, no matter what your role is. So even though last year I left from working directly with youth, the reality of the world still follows you. What do I mean by that? This Tuesday, there was an issue with an alum, mental health crisis, so then we had to go navigate that, deal with that. And that is it's so like, I want to say triggering is not the word, it's fucking affecting you in a real way, and you could handle it, you could provide the services, but it stays with you. You live in you live those towns that they live next to factories and everyone's fucking growing a third ear and shit. And they're living their lives regularly. But it takes time, and God forbid people end up getting cancer and all that shit. I wonder what the emotional equivalent to that is when you're a service provider, right? When you're a social worker, a teacher. You do this kind of work, this like work where it's usually attributed to women, right? This culture with this nurturing work, right? And what does that do to you? And I think there's even studies what happens to women's I don't know, is immune deficiency disorder or everything that disproportionately affects women.
Yeah,
and then you think of
the body's always in that fight or flight or something,
and then
like
you're
that
doing
cortisol
all this
overload.
So you're constantly nurturing, and yet you can't completely process it and express that. What does that do to the body? And I think my partner Kat posted something like a meme that said when all the emotions you suppress manifest in some disease, and it's the meme with surprise, surprise.
Yes, yes, yes. I saw that.
I don't know what the question was, but here we are.
But now I have a question because you talked about kindness, and I can see where the kindness came to write this book. But on the mother's tongue, I mean, even since when I first read the chapbook, I was like, what takes you there to write about your mother? And in this honest sense, I mean, because to write with kindness, it takes breathing. Because when you write with hate, it's just like you just let it go, let it just go. But you have to breathe and you have to think. And you have to take your moment. And was writing on your mother's tongue a way to kind of like a catharsis of what you were doing while you were teaching all these kids? Because I wanted to ask you that question when I first read the book, and I was just like, I wonder, what was the first thing on JP's mind going like, okay, I'm going to write about her. Let's go. And to have that naked out there of a person that we protect so much.
Right. It's this, how do I put this? Like, I imagine some of the men in this room, I think everyone in general, but men in particular, cishet men, where identity, those buzzwords, we're taught to suppress a lot, right? Suppress, suppress, suppress. And you have some people saying like, no, you want to be vulnerable, show your emotion. They tell you that, but they don't mean it. Right? But you got to show your emotion. No, because they'll weaponize your emotion against you, right? So I grew up, I wasn't like, I wasn't super masculine, right? So I wasn't into sports like that. I wasn't selling drugs, like, so then masculinity had to be in some other ways. But what I did have was I had a control of my emotions, and I suppressed certain emotions, which results now where I watch a movie or I read something and I'm like, all of it. Now, if something were to happen to someone I love, God forbid, I'll be good. But let me watch a good movie when the violins come in, I'll fucking cry, right? Now, when it comes to directly answer your question, so much of the writing is processing, right? But it's not cathartic. If I understand the definition of the word, it's actually the opposite. Because when you want to create something beautiful, you revise it, you keep working, and you keep revisiting it. And so much of my work is like intuitive, like I'm thinking like how does it feel, where's it going? But I'm revisiting it. The on-screens essay, I mean, I did some crazy shit where I referenced like a whole bunch of celebrities who overdosed, and Roberto, who edited the piece, was kind of like, maybe one or two examples. You don't need but I was reliving that when I'm writing about these. I'm revising it. And it's not cathartic, it's the opposite. And there's something to be said about like, oh yeah, because you have to talk about your trauma, but I think something else is happening in the world where sort of like we sit and we wallow in that trauma and we live it and we retell it and we find identity in it, right? So what I found is that it's the opposite. Like I'm processing it, but there's something pathological and I don't think very healthy when you're writing from personal and you keep revisiting and revisiting. To the point, like consider, there's a line that I had there that I had to sit with where I say, I was ashamed of my mother, right? I have that line. My boy, so I have two beta readers, they're not beta, they're alpha readers for me. We have Danny Vasquez and Rugged over here, and they usually give me feedback and stuff on my early stuff. And Danny told me with that line, he's like, hey, you don't have to have that line, which is weird because Danny doesn't give me that kind of, Danny's just more on the line level. And I know where he was coming from. Like you shouldn't put that energy out there. So I had to sit with that. It's the truth. I felt it, but does it need to be in the text? So I had to navigate that, and I kept it in the text because I want to revisit. Like I have to look back and think about that. But all of that, I don't think it's cathartic. I don't think it's like. I'm still trying to figure it out, but it's not. Because even listening to your fucking Spanish, reading it, it's removed from me, and I started feeding it in a way, and I started feeding a lot in a way I don't feel with my own writing, because it's like I've looked at it so much that I've revised that I'm removed from it. Reading it from you, I know that experience, I'm seeing it, but it's in a different language, different cadence, you're acting it out. It was very difficult for me not to cry right now, and for all my masculinity to. No, I don't think it's cathartic. I know people say that shit. I think it's like at some point you have to move on from trauma. I don't do that.
It's interesting you say that because on top of that, on top of that, it makes you realize also that we have tools that our parents, grandparents, and extent whatever, did not have at all, and had no conception of, right? And so for me, that adds to it. It makes me angry because they never had the ability to even think about processing. What's that? Shut the fuck up. Pop. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't even about that. It was about just reactionary and like this. So when I think back, especially as I'm like, you said, digging, it's funny, Miguel Piñero, right, founder of the New Eurekan, you know, one of the things he would always confess and talk about is that he always felt like he had to go deeper into his muck. Deeper, and this is why addiction was so, he struggled with addiction so much, because he had to keep going there, and it was a very destructive process for him. And I think we because of, thankfully, like, we've seen how destructive it is, I think we can try not to be destructive with ourselves, but that's challenging. And what makes it almost worse is that to think about, man, the people that don't have these tools, that don't have this outlet, or even just the ability to think about it in a way where it's going to lead to some kind of, you know what I'm saying? And when I read this, the part where I can appreciate the dissociation, the part where I can appreciate that removed type of narrator is that it's also showing that.
Right.
That is showing that knowledge, right? So like you were saying, in those silences, and that when you said that, it opened up. What I truly appreciate about the book is that I know I'm comfortable in those silences, and it gives me a landing spot for them.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? To just kind of sit in there.
But to your earlier point, I want to ask both of that because y'all deal with words, right? You say that we have tools that our parents didn't, but I've been thinking about that recently, about especially me and my partner when we were in Jassy and then Acampo and DR. And obviously they have words and all that, but there's not like a saturation of words, right? And I've been reflecting, I've been thinking like, is it that we have tools or we just have words?
We have language.
We have an abundance of words.
Yeah.
And the more words I acquire and consume, the cheaper words become, right? So then a question to Ya is like, in your relationship with words, how useful is it for us, in any sense, how useful are words? Because going to the campo, going to Garcia Puerto Plata, these motherfuckers are not long-winded.
No.
But I tell you this one, they keep their word.
Ooh.
I was telling some dude next door, I was like, yo, we're gonna meet at 3 tomorrow. He's like, no, I can't say that. I was like, no, but 3 or 4 or 5, we'll meet at 3. He's like, no, I can't. Papá decía que si tú no puedes firmar el contrato, no lo firmes. I was like, no, but it's just that we're just gonna meet at 3. He goes, I can't, in Spanish, he's like, yo, I can't tell you I'm gonna be there at 3 because I'm not sure. And that shit threw me off. Because here, you know how it is here. Yo, Leo, I'm gonna see you at the thing. Bro, we see each other 6 months later. Yo, my bad. So words are so flimsy here, right? All that to say that you say that we have more tools, but do we? Or we just have words? And I'm gonna throw it to Francis.
No, but that's the thing, though. I mean, you talked about like before, like our grandparents, they only had one word, and you needed to react. That's it.
That's it.
But now we have so many that we can make excuses.
And build worlds.
You know, we have a bag of tricks that we can use, and then we kind of like hold on to that. We are
Westerners.
Oh yeah, we're like. The thing is, like, how can you grab those words and just like make it mean something? When we write, that's what we do. We have a series of words that we can use, but we choose the ones that we think are gonna have the message clear for people to read it. I mean, that's what I hope I do.
Yeah,
that I choose the exact word that I need, so that when somebody reads it, he goes like, "Fuck, I know what he's talking about."
Yeah.
And when you read those books and you get those words and you get those lines, you're like, "How can it be like that?"
And let me just say how these are not as oppositional as we think they are. These things that we're saying, because how many times have you been told, "Tú siempre tienes un cuento"? Like you always have a story for every situation, everything.
Right.
That's that campo guy in us.
Right.
Papá siempre dice. you know, dad always says, and this and that. That's how we normally like will communicate, bringing shit back from back in the day, putting it into this new context, this and that. We are narrative people, you know, because we come from humble means, and that's what you see. When people don't have a lot of words, what do they have? Stories. You know what I'm saying?
It's wild you say that. A writer once said that like old school like storytellers, right? Storytellers, people who like oral storytelling and all that. That's like going to the basketball court and playing basketball. And then when you write into a story, that's like playing the basketball video game, which is kind of like it's like removed and it's
The
like,
technology.
but there's nothing like again like oral storytelling, like that back and forth sharing stories. You know, Mariela's really good at.
Yeah, no, I don't think there is oppositional. Oh, micrófono for Angie. Yeah, I don't see him as, you know, as that oppositional. I think we're telling stories in a different way, but I think there's a reason why you can go back to Jessica and still engage with those as the discoveries you make, right, and all of that. Spaces within spaces. I was talking to Marwa and Jesse last night about that. That there's these spaces between spaces that is not this or that. Oh, right. It's this, that, and this, and that, and this, and that, and you know what I'm saying? So it's more than just. I wanted then, thinking about that, I wanted to talk formally, right, about form and the book, right, and thinking about words, and an overuse of words. Umbilical, buying cocaine. Without a big one, almost all about your mother, lean when it comes to word, right? The sentences are lean, tight, they build tension. You know, it's like bam, 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 these short sentences, these short scenes or sketches with images and all of this stuff, and they create this tension that, and we talked a little bit about this, that then just diffuses when you get to that essay. Like, it's like everything slows down. And now we're like almost like holding hands with the speaker through everything that was where we were, what did I call it? At the speed of experience. Right? Talk about that. Talk about, especially in relation to what you're just saying about like meaningless words and shit, right? Like, how does it feel looking at that? Looking at this kind of tight, concise, you know, work at the beginning and then saying, let me take you on a 10, 11 page ride. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think like we just don't read. Like some of us who are in the book publishing world, we're like delusional and think no one's reading. Even people who buy the books. I buy a book today and I won't read it until like 5 years. Let me get to this. But I have to buy it right now, and I hope y'all buy it too because we're gonna need some money. But we don't read, right? So what I found with the chapbook, it was really slim, right? It was super accessible language. There were people who didn't read at all who read it, and I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, oh, there's a certain way I need to communicate, right? I need to consider that when I'm reading, right? Or when I'm writing, rather. So there's that. You want to be efficient, but you want to be direct. Don Israel, he was telling me like, yo, in a novel, it's like, how can I get to this point in the least amount of words? That's what Don gets at. So I've internalized that. How can I tell this story in the least amount of words? And because through revision, everything, it affords you that you can pull that off, right? With the last piece, on screens, I basically talk about how like like there's I'm consuming the world through screens, Instagram, television. I'm trying to make sense of it. It's a bombardment of images, and I'm trying to process it, right? And I wanted to capture that. So the beginning is more controlled, and the first piece is like it's more controlled, right? Very lean. Then you have the short story through the perspective of a little boy. It's overwhelming. But again, that's very accessible. Then on screens, I wanted for you to feel what it is to be on Instagram. All these ideas, all these books, suicidal ideation, thinking about family members overdosing, harm reduction, that bombardment of ideas. Because I think that's the present day reality for most of us, right? Sometimes I wake up and I go on Instagram for work. Not for work, bro. I'm trying to see what happened on Alo Folk, right? Gaelita, United Palace, this consumption, right? But what does that do to our mental health, right? And in the opening paragraph of the last essay, who Rugged helped a lot, and Danny helped me with this too, which is I jump around from mad shit, but this is the opening for me, right? And this is where I was at. It goes on screens, and a quote before the essay is because the essay references Baldwin a lot. Like I'm leaning on Baldwin a lot, reflecting on Baldwin, on James Baldwin. So I use one of Marwa's quotes, right? Because in conversation, I don't know if she posted it, but she says it. Because Marwa's wow. I love Marwa. Marwa says some shit. She goes, people post Baldwin quotes, but they don't read him. We're consuming all this information, but what are we doing with it, right? So it opens with that quote. Then I'm just gonna read you the first paragraph. It goes on March 23rd, 2024, my stepfather passed away. I'm writing this 4 months later. The U.S. presidential election has taken over the news cycle. They say democracy hangs on a thread. Russia attacks Ukraine. The United States funds Ukraine. Israel commits a genocide in Palestine. The United States funds Israel. I'm seeing the faces of Palestinian children being dug out of the rubble of bombed buildings. So many dead children, like a horror movie. A screen between me and the genocide. And it opens up with that, right? So I want to this is what we're dealing with, right? This is what's going on. I want to
But then there's like the TV screen from watching the movies, faces of that.
And then I reference
that,
movies,
and then movies cinema, and it blends in. Because I guess the main point of the essay was a Baldwin themed type of thing for the mosaic. But it's fascinating the way that even though you have, let's say, slowed us down from the beginning of the book, it's still at a frenetic pace in here. Right? The consciousness is frenetic. Francis, did you translate this?
No, I did not.
Oh, that's a lot.
I didn't have enough money to pay Francis. So too much money.
I just showed the money. It would have been fun though.
But the idea is, so I reference a whole bunch of shit, and you don't have to necessarily understand everything, but you're definitely gonna feel everything, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you're gonna identify with this feeling of I talk about it feels like when I go to bed, or there was a point, because when you asked me I was trying to figure out how to tell this story. I was processing my stepfather's death, right? And you mentioned there's opportunity for this for Baldwin, and I was already reading Baldwin for my fiction, so I was like, okay, bet. So around that time, I was trying to process, and I couldn't really sleep. I would sleep, and I write it in the essay. I would see slot machines. So I would see stuff from work. I would see literally Instagram. I would look at the books that I was reading, and there were moments when I'm half awake, half asleep, where I wouldn't know if I was remembering something that happened to me, or it was a movie, and I would think about the young people. So then I started identifying with okay, this is how people lose their mind. This is what it is. I'm not really mourning because I don't know how to make sense of my stuff. I was sudden death, which was almost inevitable and expected, and yet when it happens, you're just what the it was just a lot. So I wanted to capture that in text, right? And I wanted it to be accessible to the reader. The easier something is for you to read, the more difficult it is for the writer. When you see a dope-ass movie and you love it, you're like, oh my God, how did they do X, Y, Z? That shit must have been super difficult. The easier it is for you to consume, the easier it is for you to consume art, the more difficult it is for the artist to create that art, right?
Definitely. But what I see you saying is almost kind of like a digital fragmentation. Right?
Yeah,
it's
we can internalize that, yeah.
Yeah, so we can have a social class, tangible material fragmentation, or even a mental kind of break. But digital fragmentation takes your attention span, and my oldest daughter said this to me because we were FaceTiming, and I was moving around the apartment trying to figure out what the fuck to do next, and she was like, Daddy, you're having executive dysfunction right now. You need to sit down and think about what you want to do, like what's going on. And I was like, oh shit, what are you talking about? Executive dysfunction. She put me on game. She was like, let me tell you about this, Dad. Executive dysfunction. I was like, damn. And I was like, that social media is doing that, right? Because I'm the old man that's always like, social media is fucking everything up. But then I was like, this is a kind of digital fragmentation. You know what I'm saying? Where everything I'm seeing is taking the form of the way the algorithm presents information to me. I want it that way. You know, because it's not just a dopamine hit. Now it's the gamble. Will this give me the dopamine hit? Damn, it didn't. Swipe up. Let's see what's next, baby. You know what I'm saying? So you say slot machines. That's how that shit is like kind of.
That's how you go.
That's how you go. So that comes through. You know what I'm saying? So I see that you want to jump and say something about that.
Oh no, dude, that's mind blowing.
I mean, but y'all ready? Let's do that. Sorry, we can nerd out about shit like this all day long, bro. Like that's just what we do.
I'm super nerdy.
I like it. You guys should have a podcast.
Yeah.
It's like live podcast.
That's what's ill though. You be chilling with people, with your friends. You have one decent conversation.
And then podcast be like 4 episodes.
They do this shit.
Q&A. Is this why? I got this.
Yeah, a book club where you dissect books.
You got this. Angie está planeando. Look.
Send some emails.
Pose, do people have questions?
I got a super simple question. In that first story, you guys were talking about translation and the decisions you make, right? And this is like super in the weeds, it's super small detail, but I noticed the titles. Some were translated, some were said both in English and Spanish, and some were said in Spanish. And Luis Danticat's book, you said the title in Spanish. And I think it was Fanon, you said in English, and then you translated in Spanish. And then the Liberator magazine, you just said the Liberator. I wonder how intentional was that? I think it works every instance of when you decide and when you don't. But I wonder, yeah, like, was there a moment where you're like, okay, in this instance we're gonna do this, in this instance we're gonna do that, or was it just like more seamless? You didn't even think about it.
Frank, when I read it, defer to Francis to that. It just made sense.
Yeah.
And specifically with the Liberator magazine, it just made perfect sense. So that's totally Francis.
What I tried to do was just more obscure titles. I tried to have them in both languages. Just so that if you wanted to find those, you can go and get them. But if it was just like things that are more known, I was like, it was a gamble that I did. It was just like, let me see if he likes this. Because if it's something like Farming of the Bones, it's a more popular title than if you have the other ones. You go like, because there were a couple of them that I was like, what are those? Let me just check them out and see. And then I went for them. But that's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to frame it in both languages. So you're like, this is this one. Because sometimes the translation of the titles is different. Yeah. So it's like, if you look for this one, it's this one. So you probably read it.
And the Liberator, the work is done there. And if you wanted to find out Spanish.
If you want to continue, yes. Because that's what we do. Like sometimes we hear a song, and in that song they quote like, I don't know, whatever book. And you're like, oh, I got to read that. God, let me see what he's talking about when he said that. Because that's a dope verse.
Yeah.
But that's what I was trying to do. And it was just mostly like a gamble. I was just like, let me see if he likes this. And he didn't say anything, so I was like, okay. That's good.
No.
Dope.
To risk sounding like extremely like capitalistic, have you thought of what's next for your book? Because I know you guys like Urbe from Francis Mateo, but I think El Alto is just like supreme. And like when you read a book like El Alto, you almost want to like perform it while you're reading it. So JP, I would love to know, like for you, do you feel like there's maybe something more for your book now that it's in English and in Spanish? Maybe a little theater thing, or maybe something digital or something else?
I wanted, in fact, I was looking for an executive producer for that project.
Presente.
I know it.
Right there.
The audience. We know people, so
there's
fuck
also
around and find out.
Yeah, short series, short limited series.
Yeah.
What's crazy is that for the first 4 pieces, there was a point where I created an audio book of it, but it's kind of like sonic and it has sound effects and some wild shit. And I sold it. I was selling it directly to consumer for like a month, maybe 2 months. And that shit was so much work. It was so much labor. So I just took it back. So I don't know, maybe some folks here own it. And there's that. And I want to do something around that, like with the ear. Something like an audio book, but a little more like, I don't know if you heard of the podcast, like On Being, like there's certain, or Radio Lab, where you listen to it, but it's like sonically, it's amazing. There's so much, there's music and the sound effects. I would like to do something like that. But these are just ideations.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a space, so I'll tell you after.
Because I just think about the poem about like buying cocaine, where like there's so much like richness with the sound there.
Right.
And like if you were to walk in Washington Heights today, like even like Josefina Baez's book that you mentioned, all of her stuff is like, there's like buzzes of and even though when you said like the reggaeton left over from the car, that's like beautiful, right? And so like we know what that sounds like. But then, like, you know, if a teenager were to pick this up, or, you know, in 10 years if they were to pick it up, they might not know what that sounds like anymore. Right? And so I feel like there's such a richness with sounds in your book that's why I immediately gravitate towards, like, what else can you do with this?
Angie, y entonces.
And you speak to a particular point that I think about often as a publisher. It's like everything that younger people are consuming right now is mixed media, interactive. Like, can I like consume this through my AirPod?
Yeah.
And then if I have time, sit down and watch it as I'm listening. That's what it is for them. Yeah. Sitting there with no AirPods, no technology, and turning the page after page. That shit is gonna be extinct. Yeah. I think in not too long.
Like, so, can I hear the tip of your mother's tongue while I'm driving to
work?
Well, now we have those. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just remember we have those digital stories now that you could download. I think on Apple, Dasha Polanco was in one of them. I don't know if you recall it, and Kid Mero was in it as well. And it was this series of like 6 episodes where they were it's a story. They're telling you this story. So I can definitely imagine on the tip of my mother's tongue being something like that, where you hear the sirens and the street sounds and the music while you're walking, and you know, and reading the first piece in Spanish. And then, yeah, I think it's totally doable.
It's made already. It's already made. We got to figure out how to get it to the people.
I basically have that. It's
with
just a
the
matter
music.
of distribution, figuring out how to distribute it. Because we did research with Audible, I did some of that, and the numbers just weren't right. I rather, like, I have a lot
you
of
know
shit,
what?
but
The
I just want to
numbers.
make sure I distribute it.
So here's the thing. I don't think the numbers are ever gonna be right, because publishing and the way things are working right now is the same thing that I tell people when they're gonna publish. Yeah, your book is on Amazon, but don't just sit there and think, oh, I'm gonna get rich off of these royalties, because it's not gonna happen. You're gonna get rich out of marketing and promoting that product, and you getting it into the hands of readers and those people who are interested in listening to it.
That's the offline.
Yeah.
Who else? What's up? Yes.
So
Divino.
JP.
Shout out to Divino. It was just his birthday on Thursday. Happy birthday,
Yeah.
Divino.
No, but you did talk about reliving trauma and then focusing on it in order to pour it out on paper. And obviously, there's an entire industry that revolves around Black and Latino stories and these contexts around trauma, as if there aren't stories outside of that. How do you negotiate your own mental health in this, right? How did you decide how you identify with those traumatic experiences and what you're expressing? And then also, how do you negotiate what you're contributing into the vault of culture? As I'm assuming something unique to the other contributions that are telling these stories about Black and Latino people.
Divino with the Charlie Rose question. So if, at least for the collection, it ends with an essay. The last part of that essay, it goes somewhere else. Somewhere completely. And some of the feedback was kind of like, oh, you lose the what is it? A recurring theme, a recurring image. The motif of the screens, like I leave that behind and I end somewhere else. And I end with a sense of hope, right? So that's how I'm navigating that. Like I saw with the collection, what I was fixating in the collection. So if you read the whole book, and then by the end of it, at least the last section, I end somewhere else and I directly address my daughter. So it goes somewhere, it's moving forward somewhere else. So that's how I try to like navigate that. When it comes to like what I'm contributing in terms of the overall discourse, I like what I try to do, and my partner has to deal with this. I try to be contrarian, right? So I see what everybody else is doing and thinking, and I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. Because if you just investigate it a little more, you'll realize they're getting their ideas from somewhere, right? You'll be surprised how at work, you speak one-on-one with people, they'll talk about the same news story. You go on Instagram, people are posting the same exact thing. And I go, okay, and you'll get some variety, but the variety is binary. Because what's happened is because maybe because of politics, but everything is either this or that. Either this or that. And the powers that be, they, whoever, they have made it so that we can only think in O's and ones. It's either this or it's either that. And we see it in politics, but we see it in everything else. Even the way I just said right now, oh, words are cheap, the words ain't shit. And you were just like, no, like, there doesn't have to be an either or. There's a little more than that. There's a little more complicated nuance in that. So to answer your question, what I'm trying to do is like, are drugs bad? Maybe, right? Have drugs destroyed my community, my family members? Who knows where I would have been if the drug on wars didn't affect my home? Yeah, there's an issue there, but we need to attack it in a different way. It's not a matter of like, oh, just say no, or oh yeah, just consume drugs, figure it out on your own. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. And what I'm trying to introduce is that it's a lot messier. It's a lot more nuanced. Like folks go to DR, they spend a weekend in DR, and they come back like, oh, nostalgia, that DR this and DR that. And I'm like, are y'all not processing anything? All these white people in DR, and I'm thinking like, you're the white person now. Like, I talk mad shit about gentrification in Washington Heights. But me and my partner, we lived on 172 in Haven, and you had to see 3 bedrooms, super dope, super fly, everything new. And what we were paying the rent of a gentrifier. The other people who'd been there for a bunch of years, we would look in their apartment, that shit looked like a 1980s apartment, right? They were paying a lot less than us. My presence in that building was rising up. I was that. When I go to Cabarete and I'm over tipping because I don't understand the exchange rate, I'm part of the issue too.
Disrupting, yeah.
So motherfuckers go to DR and they come back with this, nostalgia, and they next to the palm tree and and now they drink a coconut, whatever, and you see the poor dark-skinned person who sold it to them looking at them like this motherfucker, right? Like, people are not thinking and self-reflecting how they're in place, like they're contributing. We're all complicit in this. We're all complicit in this. It's not that they and I'm the good one. Instagram is bad. Mark Zuckerberg this, but we're all on Instagram. We're all monetized. We're all making money off of Instagram, right? We're complicit in this. So what I'm trying to contribute is like, how am I complicit in it? What am I pushing against? What I'm doing right? What I'm doing wrong? I'm being honest with that, right? Like nothing is pure. Nobody here is pure. Nobody here is innocent. You know?
Yeah.
I think we gotta end, guys.
The pointing out of it is what's up. You know, like you were saying that the programming is like, this one-track story. But I think if you are a creator from our world, the pointing out of the messiness got to be at the heart of it. And what I love about what you did there is the messiness is there, and just the messiness is well-rounded, bro. And I think that's what we got to do. Somebody else.
Nico, and then we gotta go.
It's interesting that you assembled it as a chapbook, but you write across different genres. And so I would love to know, like, for you, what genre is the most immediate for you to write in, and what's the one that's the biggest challenge? And then for you as the translator, obviously you can write in both languages. Which language is like the easiest and which one is the most challenging?
For me, the easiest, like the personal essay, I think you're direct. You're like, this is what I think about X, Y, Z. It's very direct. It's easier to revise and it's even fun. You could show off that you read a book or saw a movie. I enjoy that. Fiction, because you have to create a scene. You have to like, okay, I'm in this room, the senses, you're seeing, you're hearing. It takes so much. And then you want the person to forget that they're reading, right? With nonfiction, it's kind of like, it's a conversation. It feels more conversational, right? Like we both know we're reading about a person, my experience with drugs and family, whatever. With fiction, it's kind of a world, right? Wait, balance. So yeah, so I would say easier nonfiction, personal, like personal essays, let's say. More difficult fiction because it requires a lot.
Well, that's a question that I've been asking myself for a while. Like, what's better for me to write? And I started writing in Spanish because I wanted to have my parents to read my stuff. Like, it was necessary to me. Like, this was the first book, and I wanted them to read what was there. I mean, the book is dedicated to them. But I started writing was in the English language, which is weird, because my first language is Spanish, and I kind of grew up in the Dominican Republic. But I started writing in that, and it continued on 2 more books. And now I wrote something. I have a manuscript that I'm shopping out for poetry, and it's in English. And I don't know which language comes first. It depends on the necessity. And the necessity is going to dictate what I do and how I say the things and how I want to communicate that. Sometimes I have an arsenal of words in Spanish that I'm like, okay, it's going to be in this one because I have the arsenal right here. Or it's going to be in English because it's the sounds, it's that. So I don't know. To me, it's just I feel like I'm a hybrid because I kind of like half here, half there. Yeah. I wasn't just like raised there and then came here 2 years ago, or that I was raised here and then I went to the Dominican Republic for 2 years just to chill, to see how that works. And I feel like I have a foot in both sides. Like I'm both. Like I'm a hybrid. So it depends on what I need to express. Again, on the necessity. And the necessity on the first book was just my father and my mother to read it. That to me was just like, it had to be that way. And then the second one was just something that I wanted to do on the neighborhood. And if you see the book, it's called El Alto. It's in English and Spanish. It's just how I felt the neighborhood was. And by the way, that book is going to be pulled out soon. So hopefully you'll get to buy it on Amazon. So please buy it now before they take it out of Amazon. I'm planning on doing something else with a couple of books. But yeah, it all depends on the necessity of it. Like again, now to me to write this manuscript in English was necessary because I wanted to, and it's only English. Of course, it's going to have a couple of words in Spanish, like calife, because that's carnival there and that. But it all depends. It all depends on the necessity.
Sorry, that made me think of like the conversation you were having about like the worth of words, in terms of like we have more words, and does that make them less valuable because we have the supply and demand of language. And from what you just shared, like, and I agree with you, like I think the more words the better, because now you have such skill to more than just like markets that you can sell your books to, but more importantly, like more tools to express your lived experience on this earth. So I definitely think like the more words the better. Like there's no such thing.
But and the thing on that is like it depends on the weight and the worth that you give to these words. Because you can have 5 words and they can be meaningless. And you can have 1,000 and they can mean a lot of things when you are constructing whatever you need to build to express yourself. So it all depends on what value you give to things and how you come about it. Because it's again, we're going back to the whole, it's not this or that. Right. It's just a lot of things because it's life. You said before, in life, I can be a good father today, but not a really so good father the next day. But you are a living thing that are experiencing your surroundings. The words are already written, and they already did their thing. So it's not like they're dead, but they're history, and history is dead. But you are alive and you are experiencing things a lot. You think that character will have the same thing to tell. You think one day he'll be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be like really kind to them telling the story? No. There's gonna be one day that he's gonna find someone and he's gonna be like, you know what, don't buy anything. Just go fucking OD somewhere. But it's because he's not gonna live on that day. But he lived that day when he was telling that story. That's where he was.
Thank you, everybody. Give it up to JP, y'all.